Welcome to the first of 3 videos in a web-based training series on optical device use. Today's presentation is Instruction in the Use of Optical Devices. This series is presented in collaboration with Lions Club International Foundation, Kansas Lions, Kansas School for the Blind, and Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. My name is Cindy Bockover, and I am a teacher in short-term programs at TSBVI. I was born with ROP and so have grown up with low vision. Previously, I was a teacher with Project Providing Access to the Visual Environment, Project PAVE in Tennessee. That's a low vision services program that emphasizes use of prescribed optical devices.
And I'm Chrissy Cowan, Mentor Coordinator with the TSBVI Outreach Program. Previously, I was an itinerant teacher of students with visual impairments, providing direct instruction to students in the Austin area. This presentation will cover the range of optical devices typically prescribed in clinical settings, specific skills needed to complete visual access to near and distance targets, and motivating strategies for teaching students ages 3 through 21 skills to use magnifiers and monocular telescopes. Please be sure your student has been evaluated by a clinical low vision specialist before you begin optical device training.
We will be using terminology specific to skills with training with optical devices. This helps students to recognize they're developing their own expertise as training goes on, and having specific vocabulary to refer to lets make sure that the student and the teacher are both clearly understanding each other. This next slide presents the 6 terms that we will be discussing through this presentation. They are localizing, focusing, spotting, scanning, tracing, and tracking. They're listed here for you to refer to as needed. We'll talk about them as a progression, but in reality, students are experimenting with these along the way. Simultaneously, they may be moving from one and then trying a more advanced skill. But we will talk about them discreetly. There are specific skills, and each of these is important for our goal of helping students achieve proficiency with devices. The next slide presents a list of training resources that Chrissy and I have found helpful. These are all very teacher-friendly publications, and please consider having these available in your own office library. Explaining the rationale and benefits of optical devices can be especially important during meetings or conversations when you're talking with either regular classroom teachers or parents or administrators, so that they're understanding the purpose of these lessons. And there are several points that we want to cover that also add to the rationale. The student has immediacy of information, meaning that the student does not have to wait for somebody to explain what's on the page or to have it produced in large print. The student is able to see it in real time. The student also has locus of control, where she is deciding, I want to pay more attention to this. I want to see the details on this. It can be a very empowering feeling when the student recognizes, I can see the things I want to see in both school and beyond school. The student has access to regular print and to non-print items such as logos, diagrams, visual art, all of those things that the students in their classroom are talking about. Students also, through use of optical devices, this can lead to improved reading performance. Students with low vision typically have far fewer instances of exposure to print than their peers, and this leads to lowered performance in reading. But by using optical devices, they are able to increase that access to print. Optical devices are also convenient. They are a grab-it-and-go device, very portable, can be carried in a pocket or backpack, are affordable and commercially available. So all of these items of rationale can help support that point with parents and administrators. It's important to have that conversation with your student. What do they see as the primary rationale for using optical devices? Hearing their goal is a great beginning to instruction. Just like learning to read Braille, use of optical devices requires routine instruction for the student to gain efficiency. We also want to talk about the type and amount of service. This comes from a Delphi study where the recommendations are that device training takes place 1 to 3 times per week in 30-minute to 1 hour sessions, and that's direct instruction in structured settings. And this takes place from starting in preschool through high school. So as the academic demands change for the student, we are monitoring how are they handling the optical devices in that new situation.
Optical device training can be done at any age level, but you'll need to adjust your techniques and materials and settings to your student's age and educational level. Starting with young students is recommended to capitalize on the abundant curiosity and to lay down the foundation for learning concepts. For the preschooler, optical devices can be presented in a way that makes them fun. Before you even hand them a device, you can use a kaleidoscope to teach positioning or holding something up to the eye, proper grasp, and to encourage verbal description of what the student sees inside the kaleidoscope. You would next use a paper roll tube to teach skills such as locating, spotting, and scanning. For one of my very first telescope lessons, I like to sit my young student on a front porch step and place a ball on the ground about 5 to 10 feet in front of her, showing her where I place the ball. Then I hand her a paper roll tube and show her how to hold it up to her eye. Students will typically select their better eye for this. Next, I ask her to find or spot the ball again, but this time looking through the tube. As she turns her head to scan, I label this action by saying something like, "You've turned your head to find the ball through the tube. That's called scanning." The same activity is repeated, but this time I introduce a pre-focused telescope. We talk about the concepts of clear and fuzzy, and I ask her to spot and name the other toys I've scattered in a line on the same plane as the ball. My visits to preschoolers also include a stand magnifier. I primarily introduce this tool within the context of looking at pictures in books as I read a story, or looking closely at flowers, leaves, shells, and other naturally occurring objects in their home and yard environments. We might put together an experience storybook with these objects viewed through a magnifier. The focus for optical device training changes somewhat for the elementary age students because now we're adding academic settings and materials to our training. Optical devices will contribute significantly to inclusion for a student with low vision. Starting as early as kindergarten and certainly in first grade, skills become more sophisticated due to the academic demands on even young students. We will be working on maintaining correct working distance, or the distance between the device user and the objective, accessing a variety of print text such as maps and charts, numerical equations, increasing literacy skills such as reading speed and fluency, and helping the student find ways to participate more fully in social activities. Then, by high school, optical devices will contribute to further independence for the student. We want the high school student to begin to anticipate when and where they will need devices and be prepared to use them within many contexts. As the reading material becomes more complex and copious, educators will need to continue to monitor and build speed and efficiency with the devices. Also, students should start generalizing skills learned into the community environment.
A few guidelines of good teaching also apply to good training with optical devices. I want to cover several of these. There are concepts for effective training with optical devices, starting with familiar objects and moving to unfamiliar. Say for small children, Sesame Street characters typically are very familiar, and finding those on a page, whether at near or at distance, and then bringing in less familiar targets or faces that the student can describe. Stationary objects are easier to find than moving objects. So starting with items that have been placed around the room and then moving into a setting where you can use rolling balls or rolling trucks and cars. Large and then moving to small. Large items give that immediate, easy success, that very positive feeling with starting out training. And then by making the target smaller, you're helping the student understand, I'm getting better at this. The fourth point is moving from objects that are on one plane and advancing to multiple planes. So items on a flat wall are easier to find, and then using a wider, vast space for finding targets. And then starting in private, helping the student to build their skill, to become more comfortable, and then gradually finding the setting and letting the student be able to identify the setting where they can be using the device in front of people. So they're getting familiar with that power of the telescope, and it is only through stretching that power and testing how far away can an item be? How small can it become before the power of my telescope doesn't work? So that's what these lessons are bringing in, so that students have more experience with that. These guidelines are very important for that sense of building success and enthusiasm during the lessons, and this is important for both the student and the teacher. We've presented some foundational knowledge for beginning device instruction, and now we want to move specifically into the skills for efficient use of magnifiers and telescopes. At the beginning of the presentation, we referred to those 6 skills that we will be covering. In the chart shown here, on the left side of the chart, there are 5 skills that are specific to working with near devices or magnifiers, and the 6 skills for working with telescopes.
Now we'd like to separate optical device training into 2 distinct components, training with magnifiers and training with telescopes. However, you will most likely be providing optical device training with the 2 different types of devices simultaneously with your student, depending on devices prescribed by the low vision specialists. We'll start with training with magnifiers. Your low vision specialist may recommend a power, style, or type of device to start with, but you might want to explore other styles of similar powers and/or qualities with your students to include them in the decision-making process. Pictured here are examples of near magnification devices typically prescribed for students. The device on the upper left is a handheld illuminated magnifier with a rectangular lens. This design is ideal for reading continuous text. Next to it is a pocket or folding magnifier which slips into a pocket or purse handily. The third one on the top row is an iPad, which is gaining much popularity because of its capacity to easily enlarge print and pictures. On the bottom row, the first photo on the left is a stand magnifier, called that because it literally rests on a flat surface. Next to this is an illuminated pocket magnifier that is very popular due to its discrete qualities, and then a pair of glasses with built-in magnification. These glasses are called microscopes and require a little different training. Magnifiers all have their pros and cons. It's a good idea to experiment with devices you have on hand before the visit with a low vision specialist so that the student can begin to express a preference. Consider purchasing an array of devices for experimentation purposes. The Envision Kit from the American Printing House for the Blind includes sample devices and is a good starting point for showing a range of tools. Stand devices are inexpensive, portable, though a little bulky, and have a fixed focal distance. Stand magnifiers tend to be easy to use and are routinely prescribed by low vision specialists, but they are limited to reading on a flat surface. Handheld devices have many things going for them. They're portable, inexpensive, and cosmetically acceptable. These require a little more training on holding a steady focal distance. Microscopes look like glasses with a special lens in one or both frames. The user's hands are free to hold material close, and head and arm movements are engaged when scanning. The more powerful the lens, the closer the material must be to the lens. These tend to be a little more expensive than the other designs. Electronic devices are pretty trendy now, even though they're expensive and problematic. Current examples are the Ruby and the Quick Look. They are good for spot viewing, like reading a receipt, but very poor for building reading speed due to the device's larger font sizes. Needless to say, the typical child forgets to charge this device and therefore has the perfect excuse for not doing their work. The iPad and e-readers, such as the Kindle, would be the exception for electronic magnification. Sometimes a student will use one type of device for certain types of tasks and yet another for different tasks. For example, they might be using a stand magnifier for reading flat materials, but use a handheld magnifier during science, where they're looking at three-dimensional objects. As you explore properties of different devices, the student could keep a journal of when and how they use a particular device. In this photo, a student is using mid-range viewing lenses to read the computer screen. Considering how many hours students spend on this computer daily, being aware of this skill in coordination with the correct device is mandatory. When you just think about all the visual tasks and opportunities that zoom past us every day, access becomes huge. Consider a day in the life. There's info in books, magazines, mail, cooking directions, bus schedules, buttons on remote controls, text messages, maps, menus, store advertisements, receipts, and bills. Then there's detailed visual tasks like painting fingernails, repairing a necklace, gluing a craft project. You get the idea, so let's get started with teaching magnifier skills. Fixation, localization, focal distance, scanning, and tracking. Fixation is simply looking at an object through a lens. Here a boy is looking at a scorpion. Looking at bugs is always fun, I think. Localization is finding something amidst clutter, like a particular word on a page or the graphic that goes with text in a book. Cindy is teaching this student how to locate something on a page in a textbook.
Distance is the critical factor for maximizing the power of the magnifier. For years, students have perfected that habit of zooming in to a page or moving up very close to an object. They figured out that getting closer to it, it makes it easier to see. Now, we bring in a magnifier that changes that says we want you to stretch your distance. So this requires training and helping the student to understand that the work distance with the magnifier is critical. So focal distance is adjusting the position of the magnifier. I think of it as finding the sweet spot. When you're holding the magnifier, there should be space between the eye and the magnifier lens, then the magnifier lens and the material. So it's holding that in where the magnifier is doing the work, some of the work for you. Also, having that focal distance can help with easing muscles in the neck, the arms, the shoulders, and using slanted material, either a slant board or a 3-ring binder, so that that material is raised up and you can relax the muscles a little. All of that is working with focal distance. So I'm going to demonstrate the couple of different options on hand position when you think about maintaining that focal distance. Again, it's moving smoothly across the line of print and using the base of a finger or edge of your hand, and then when my hand gets tired in one position, I'll just switch to balancing on my thumb and moving smoothly across the line. Again, hand position, just as in Braille instruction, working with a student on developing that fluid movement is as important when training with optical devices. Paying attention to these habits is essential. It helps for students to be able to understand some of that science of optics as they're working with a magnifier. And again, they're gaining that expertise of developing that skill of working with a tool. Now we want to look at scanning, which is repetitive fixations that are required to move from one target to another. For some students, scanning, they pick it up very easily. They figure it out and little training is needed. But with other students, several lessons, kind of breaking the skill down and building it to more advanced scanning is needed. So making sure that the student can maintain steady fixation. It helps at the beginning to reduce the clutter on a page and work with double-spaced material. Each of those factors bring in easier success for the student. Then be consistent with methods for stabilizing your hand, holding the magnifier against the material. Sometimes that can be the base of where the hand meets the wrist or the base of the thumb. So being able to have a couple of positions. And start with a stand magnifier that does sit flat on the page, so there's less work for the student to do there, and then introducing and moving to the handheld magnifier. A stand magnifier such as a dome is a very good introductory tool, but as the student's reading speed increases and they've become more comfortable, it's important to move to a handheld magnifier. A dome will always have friction as you move it across the line of print, and this is going to slow down reading speed. You can start with short reading samples such as jokes can be quick and easy to read. Moving to words that are familiar to the student or silly words, and then bringing in those longer multisyllabic words that are specialized within subject areas such as music or math, some of those that the student might be having in class. In this photo, a student is completing an early scanning activity, identifying the stickers across the line and then moving back to the left side of the page is that essential fluid movement that is necessary in scanning. In the next set of photos, on the top left, a student, preschooler, working with emergent literacy is using the dome on a slanted page and showing good positioning. On the bottom left, a student is completing an informal reading assessment. These should be done regularly each semester, and the students can become very invested in tracking their own progress, making a chart of that activity so that they are aware of how they're doing in comparison to peers with regular text. On the top right, a student has a number of devices in front of her and is conducting her own trial and error session on what is the magnifier that is comfortable for me with this kind of material. There are a number of factors that she has to consider here, such as the size of the lens. Some of them are rectangular and you can fit more words in that lens, which is very important. The weight of the magnifier can be important for some students who don't need the illumination. Then the smaller, lighter weight magnifiers that don't have batteries can be easier for them to use.
When you're working on scanning with a student, your materials are going to get progressively a little more difficult, but the goal here is to maintain a steady fixation. You could do this with a stand magnifier, and to learn that left to right, up to down progression that's smooth. On this little worksheet, I have lines that are different colors, and in the middle I have a letter of the alphabet printed very small because I want them to be able to see it through magnification. So I may ask the student to follow the purple line and tell me what letter you see in the middle, and then go back to the left and follow the red line, etc. So we'll go all the way through this kind of little worksheet. Then, getting progressively a little more difficult, here's a similar worksheet. I have 3 blue lines, 3 orange, 3 green, and 3 yellow. And somewhere on these lines is a little bitty picture that at the time I pulled from children's magazines, but you can use any little picture or sticker. And you're going to want them to scan from left to right, tell you what the picture is. So this is also picture identification. Keep going until the end of the line, return back to the left, and keep scanning. You do want them to build speed as they do this, and so just encourage them to move as quickly as they can, staying on the line. From those big bold lines, we're going to progress to smaller lines, and these lines are narrow, and there's little bitty colored dots here, and I may say scan from left to right and tell me what colored dots you see as you keep going. This is a little bit easier because the lines are spaced pretty far, and then what you see happening here are dashed lines, so they have to maintain that left to right even scanning. Then I'm going to go from lines to actual words, because that is the whole point of this, is getting to words. These are riddles which work with second graders, typically the end of first grade. Some early learners don't understand riddles and don't see the humor in that, but I ask them to scan, and of course this is at a reading level that the student is able to do. What kind of bean will not grow in a garden? And then there's a little bitty picture there of jelly beans, but the answer is way over here. And so they have to continue, stay on a line actually that's invisible, and get to that word. And then you just complete this worksheet all the way down. You're going to go through scanning activities like this really very quickly, maybe in one session or two. Once your student is scanning lines of print, you begin to fine-tune by providing more opportunities to explore the use and properties of the device. For example, this student is using a potato chip bag to practice using a search pattern to select a target area. In this case, he's looking at the salt content in a bag of chips, something we really would rather not know, but might be important for health reasons. He's finding out that bold headings mean something, as well as sidebars. You'll want to collect a bag full of flattened cereal boxes, canned food labels, restaurant receipts, vitamin bottles, game instructions, etc., in order to spend a lesson on spot reading. Using a magnifier proficiently when reading is not an automatic task. Often, individuals who begin using devices for near-point material will have an initial drop in their reading speed. However, as with any new skill, practice often goes a long way in improving performance. To develop stamina, the student should do the following. Practice, practice, practice. Use the magnifier with short daily reading assignments that are monitored by someone. Record progress, such as keeping a record of their reading speed and comprehension. It's quite heartbreaking to see low vision students in middle and high school who have had no reading intervention and are reading 2 to 3 times slower than their peers. Building stamina and fluency with a device will require practice using repeated reading strategy for at least 3 20-minute sessions weekly, monitoring progress as you teach. Research suggests that the best fluency building techniques for students with low vision are paired reading and listening while reading. The TVI should be a contributing member to the students' literacy team.
Another tool that works well for some students are microscope glasses, or sometimes these are called high-ad lenses. These can be especially helpful for students with extended reading. These require a close work distance, so the adjustment time in using these can take a little longer. It is important that their training sessions be set up at least 2 to 3 times a week, 20-minute sessions where the student is practicing using these materials, using these glasses, and learning to adjust to them. Experiment with reading method as well. The student can move just their eyes across the page or use head movements. They can move the material itself, or it can be a combination of these. Finding that preference, the student having their own preference for which system works best for them, is very important. Lighting and body position with microscopes, again, these are important. Because the material is so close to the face, it's important to find that angle of where the light works best and having a body position that's comfortable. Some students will rest the material on, prop up their knees and rest the book there so that they can bring it closer to their face, or use a cushion and rest their arm on the cushion and hold the material up. So encouraging the student to develop their own system on this is very important. Again, keeping a record of progress is helpful for the student to get a sense of how am I doing with this different type of magnifier. When these are prescribed in a low vision exam, please make sure that the doctor covers with the student how these are, the microscopes are different than a magnifier. It's a magnifier within a frame, but again, the optics require that work distance is close. So I want to demonstrate use of the microscope lenses. And as I find the focal distance, I make sure by moving it in and out a little bit, moving across the line of print, coming back to the left, staying on the line. And the different factors here that are in play are my elbows are rested on the table, and I have the material lifted up so that there's no stress in my arms or shoulders with having to balance the material. It's just muscles are comfortable, and being able to maintain this over extended amount of time for reading a continuous text. We next move to the final skill with near devices is tracking, and that's following a moving target. So you can tell why that is one of those more advanced skills. In these next photos, we demonstrate or show a couple of tracking activities. Learning to paint your fingernails under a magnifier because you're having to follow that moving brush is very interesting for some the female students. In the bottom left, practicing handwriting under a magnifier, especially when all the variety of forms that are out there, it's important that students develop the skill. Not everything is able to be completed on the computer, and when students are out there in public, you want them to be able to have this skill down and be able to do it smoothly. In the photo on the right, a student is tracking a bug that's moving, and for some students this is just a very appealing activity. This concludes the first section of the instruction in the use of optical devices on magnifiers. In part 2, we will cover training with telescopes.